the issues and kind of played both sides. But I think in reality, sooner or later, or at least in a lot of the cases, we're going to be forced to actually take a position. And I think that when you're raising everybody's hopes, you're bound to let down somebody. And as far as building relationships, you don't build those with words. You build them with action and following through on what you say.
Stay on the line. I think you've brought up a very interesting point. I'd like to discuss it, and I'll even give you a follow-up. But Ahmad, I want you to respond to the first part of the suggestion that in raising hopes, you're likely to maybe to disappoint people down the road.
President Obama mitigated that by talking about great compromises that both sides have to give on any of the conflicts that he talked about. And I think he's right. I think that, as he said, everybody has to get serious. And to get serious, you have to make compromises. If you stick to your guns and you don't want to budge an inch, we're not going to move forward, whether it's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or whether it is the rift between the West and the Muslim-majority world in terms of perceptions, or rather misperceptions.
Joe?
The president made a distinction between the war in Afghanistan, he called it a war of necessity, and the war in Iraq, he called it a war of choice. He came very close, not quite, but came close to apologizing for the war in Iraq. And I think, unfortunately, gave short shrift to what the United States and its allies have accomplished in Iraq for the benefit of the people of Iraq. He also, I think, omitted to recount for his audience other expenses of American blood and treasure for the benefit of Muslim peoples around the world, from Bosnia and Kosovo to, Somalia and on into the Middle East and elsewhere. I think that it's unfortunate that President Bush's line, if you're not with us, you're against us, was wildly and widely misinterpreted as a threat to Muslims in general, as opposed to, I think, a much more narrow sense of what he was looking for in terms of cooperation, this global outrage at this extremist act that had taken place in the United States. President Obama did, however, try to get very specific when he turned to talking about Afghanistan, about what the United States would do and what needed to happen in Afghanistan. And if I may quote just a sentence that the president said in Cairo, military power alone is not going to solve the problems in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Gidi, he did mention Pakistan. Then he went on to say, that's why we plan to invest $1.5 billion each year over the next 5 years to partner with Pakistanis to build schools and hospitals, roads and businesses, hundreds of millions to help with those who've been displaced. That's why we're providing more than $2.8 billion to help Afghans develop their economy and deliver services that people depend on. Full stop. Well and good. I mean, here he is making the point that the United States is trying to be generous and do its part. But what was utterly missing from that section of the speech is the crucial central role of the people of Afghanistan themselves, or the people of Iraq themselves, in taking responsibility for the nature of their culture, their political society, the way they treat women, the way they build their economy, the way they relate to other peoples in other countries. And it's simply not enough to say that this is sort of one more U.S. spending program. If that's the action coming out of the United States that's intended here, that's missing the great civilizational dialogue opportunity that the president opened here.
Gidi.
Well, I agree that, I mean, from my perspective, the style of the president was wonderful, but we have to wait and see how the substance will be implemented, because we're dealing with really some very difficult issues in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. These are the three major areas.
Was the style and the tone very similar, however, to what we heard, the way he spoke on the campaign?
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that also what was clear here, and obviously he did it at a university, he's talking to a younger generation. He's trying to sort of like organize the world for the next primary.
Right.
That's my view of the way he's acting.
Maybe, but one of the things we should also take into account is that many of these younger people in the Middle East, they don't really have control over what their governments do. And our relationship so far has been with these dictatorial, authoritarian governments who would be opposed to ideas, let's say democracy. They'd be very much opposed to it, as was mentioned here. Therefore, it may raise expectations, as the caller said, but in a way we may have more problems, because then some of these expectations will not be carried out.
Doug, are you buying what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think I agree totally with what she had said, that
Okay, good. I'm glad we've got a satisfied customer. Ahmad, final word to you, and then we're going to move on.
Well, just to be as clear as possible, we cannot divorce this speech from the context of the past 8 years before President Obama and the poor image that the United States suffered in the Muslim-majority world as a result of not just the discourse of President Bush, where he said, you're either with us or against us, but the policies and actions, from torture to Abu Ghraib to the mismanagement of Iraq in general to Guantanamo. All these things cannot be discounted. And so Obama knew that he had his work cut out for him to climb out of that hole that we have been dug into and to reclaim the image of the United States as a leader of the world that can be trusted. It's powerful, everybody knows that, but the question is, can it be trusted? Can it be deemed as genuine?
Let's go to Sylvia, listening to us in Winnebago, Illinois, on WLS, our flagship station. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Yeah, what did that hieroglyphic mean that Obama spotted on the wall there in that tomb? Amongst all the other hundreds of hieroglyphics, he saw one right off the bat that looked like him.
Ahmad.
It was just an image of a commoner, or, you know, not a pharaoh, and he had rather large ears. So it was just to the comic side of President Obama that he said, I think I look like that guy.
Ron in Knoxville, Tennessee, listening to us on WNOX. You're on the air next.
Hi, how you doing?
Okay.
My statement is very simple, sir, and if I was angry with the gentleman who answered the phone, I apologize. First of all, this man does not tell the truth. The fact is there's 1.5 or 2 billion Muslims around the world, and they're controlled and misused and beat up by a small majority of their own people. How come they don't take control of the situation that they're living in? Number two, my point is that Barack Obama stood on that stage in Cairo and said that this would be one of the largest Muslim nations in the world. That cannot be true, sir. If we only have 2.3 or whatever the number is of Muslims in this country versus what they have in the rest of the Muslim world.
Well, I think, let me just interject for a moment. I want to get, I'll get everybody a chance to respond, but again, I heard some of the analysts sort of, they were a little taken back by the population that estimate for number of Muslims in the United States. So let me ask one of our two Muslims on the panel this evening, head of the Chicago Office of Council of American Islamic Relations. How many Muslims are there in the United States?
There is no official census of faith-based communities in the United States. And so the number that has been used traditionally, owing to certain surveys and studies, has been 7 to 8 million or 6 to 8 million. Recently, the Pew Research studies, I think, arrived at a number 2.5 million. So any of those numbers can be quoted, since we don't have an official number that we can use as an objective number.
The most reliable statistical reports that I have seen, including, for what it's worth, the CIA fact book on the United States, has the Muslim population of the United States at 1.8 million. The number 7 million seems wildly inflated, although that is the number that the president chose to use, and it's unclear where that population is to be found. The president did quote two other statistics, however, which are absolutely true. There is at least one mosque in every one of the 50 states, and insert 57 state joke here. The president's flub during the campaign when he miscounted the American states. But there is at least one mosque in every one of the 50 states, plus the District of Columbia, and it's way easier to count institutions. And there are at least 1,200 incorporated or established Muslim mosques of various sort of denominations. Some are very large, like the one in Washington, the one in New York.
And one in Chicago,
the ones in the Chicago suburbs.
Right.
And some are small storefront mosques, but there are about 1,200 in the
Before we take another call, I want to ask you a question, Gidi, and that is because I didn't get your answer to the question I asked at the beginning of the broadcast. What olive branch, if this speech last week was an olive branch from the President of the United States to the Muslim world, what sort of olive branch should we get back? What should we look for? Who in the Arab or the Muslim world, who should step up and do something, and what should they do? Just because then we can do more. I mean, it's back and forth.
Well, okay, we've offered an olive branch, but what does the olive branch mean? Now, Lebanon is having an election today. We don't know the results, but one of the major players in the Lebanese election is Hezbollah. Now, are we going to recognize them? That would be a real olive branch. Financial Times, which is very
that would
important.
be an olive branch by us, though.
By us, right? And then
But
if
what
we
I
do
want to
that,
ask is what should their olive branch
all
be
right.
about? We do have to pause and think about that.
All right.
What
Okay.
olive branch should we be looking for from the Muslim world? Back shortly from Chicago.